Good morning. Welcome back for another Saturday morning. This morning we're going to talk about expectation and how defend and protect mode plays into that and how that plays into defend and protect mode. So we see and often experience what we expect to see. And that can be influenced by our patterns, which we talk about a lot, about our conditioning. And so Einstein, which you've probably heard this quote a lot, many, many times, but there's more to it that I found when I was getting ready for this talk yesterday. And so the familiar part is the important question facing humanity that Einstein said was, is the universe a friendly place? But he goes on to say, if we decide the universe is an unfriendly place, then we will use our technology, our scientific discoveries, and our natural resources to achieve safety and power by creating bigger walls to keep out the unfriendliness and bigger weapons to destroy all that is unfriendly. And I believe that we are getting to a place where technology is powerful enough that we may either completely isolate or destroy ourselves as well in this process. So he continues, if we decide that the universe is neither friendly nor unfriendly, and that God is essentially playing dice with the universe, then we're simply victims to a random toss of the dice, and our lives have no real purpose and meaning. But if we decide the universe is a friendly place, then we will use all of our technology, our scientific discoveries, and our natural resources to create tools and models for understanding the universe, because power and safety will come through understanding its workings and its motives. I was like, well, this is really cool. And it so reminds me of especially dreams, and that I've been talking about this for years, about this is the nature of dreams, that dreams are here to assist us. They're here to help us. They're here to help us move into really this consciousness that Einstein is talking about at the end. So years ago, some friends and I decided to do some healing around the warrior consciousness that we have in our culture. And the warrior, it had come to me, was because of a dream, was unable to see the young feminine. The young feminine you can look at as the child, you can see it as the soul, you can see it as a variety of different things, but they're unable to see and hear that young feminine. So energetically, what happens with a warrior is you have to armor up. So both energetically, emotionally, and you get into this defend and protect mode, disconnecting from the soul, from feeling, from emotions, right? You have to in order to survive. It's really in the sense of war, that's the thinking that that's the only way to go forward. So when this friend and I decided to go do some healing around this, we were at her house, and after we finished the ceremony, one of the women, or three of us, one of the women went down to the bathroom. And when she was down in the bathroom, she called to us. She said, oh my God, you guys got to come down here and see this. So the three of us were in the bathroom, and on the side of my friend's tub was this big, huge brown bug. And so typically you would be like, oh my God, right? Like, gross, unless you like bugs. But the two of us were like, or the three of us were bent over, like looking at it more closely. And I said, well, isn't that interesting? We were talking about the warrior who can't see the young feminine. And here, look at this bug. It looks like it has glasses on, and like sunglasses, like it can't see. And so we were like, yeah, right, look at that. And so my friend had music playing, and I said, now look at the antennas. They're like bopping to the music. They're moving to the sound of the music. And we're like, yeah, right. That's so interesting. And so we're all like just inches away from this thing on the tub, just like, assessing it. And then my friend whose house it was said, you know what's funny about this? She said, normally when I see them, she said, I try and kill them and they always run away. And in that moment, when she said those words, the bug took off in a flash. And I was like, oh my gosh, like there's some connection between what we're thinking, what we're expecting, what we're experiencing, our interpretation of the situation that we're witnessing, and the response that we get from that, what we are witnessing. So her expectation and view was like changing in that moment. We were like witnessing this change from curiosity into, like a defend and protect mode, we could say. And that changed what was happening in that moment. It changed that response of that bug to us in its perception of us as going from harmless to a threat. So defend and protect mode is what I think changed that situation. Just the thought of her normal response, not her intention to actually go after the bug, but just the thought of it is what influenced the response in my perception of the moment. So in physics, they talk about this as the observer effect, right? That the observer effect is the disturbance of an observed system by the act of observation. So my understanding of this is that they've seen that the researcher, just their expectations, can influence the results that they get. So in a sense, if this is actually accurate and true, then no research has validity, none, because the researchers are the ones who are influencing the outcome of the information that they're going to be collecting. So in fairy tales, this dynamic is really clear in The Handless Maiden. So in the beginning, the Handless Maiden, and I'm not going to go through all the details like I normally do, I'm just going to kind of parse out the relevant information and just add enough other information to make it understandable. But so in the beginning, the Handless Maiden's father sacrifices her to the devil, which is accidental. So again, you've heard me talk before about the devil. It's not the devil, it's the ego. So in essence, in our culture, what's happened is that the feminine, which we could see as the soul, has been sacrificed to the ego through this particular period of history, thousands of years that we've been living in. And so many of the fairy tales start this way because they're depicting our internal situation and our external situation. So most of us have been conditioned to believe we're the ego and then have lost connection to the soul and haven't realized that that's what we truly are. So because of this sacrifice by her father, then to the devil, then she would perceive the world as unfriendly. Now, you've heard me talk about the Handless Maiden before, so ultimately she doesn't end up going off with the devil. That gets thwarted. But it still doesn't change the fact that this happened, that the father was not perceived, which I just talked about, I think it was last week, about the environment that the father creates and sets up for the young feminine. And whether it's in a man or a woman, it doesn't matter. But that environment is set up by that father. So here we have the results of that, which means that the world is not a friendly place. So she decides she can't stay there, which is really good in terms of consciousness evolving. Because what happens is, let's say you realize that you're in ego and that this situation is playing out in your life, and you want to be in touch with this part of yourself that's the soul. It can just have an inkling or a feeling that things are off, things aren't quite right. That's the way it started for me. And so when I realized that, that's really what started my journey. I didn't even realize it was a journey. I didn't realize it was starting. Hindsight, I was able to see like, oh, this is how it started. It wasn't like the spiritual experience I had, 10 years later, but it was that feeling that began to come to the surface, that began to prompt me to move on over and over again. So in that moment for the handless maiden, that she's been sacrificed, she realizes, I have to leave my parents' house. You also see this frequently in fairy tales. Even if the heroine stays at home, there's some dynamic that changes, or you can see that there's some shift in the like normal good father, good mother. That happens a lot. And so she has no choice in this moment but to leave the consciousness of her parents. So that consciousness is where that sacrifice of the feminine is. And so that inkling I had that something was off was that sense, that deep inner sense that this is not in alignment with something. Something is out of alignment here. Something doesn't feel right. And so she decides to leave home, leave the parental consciousness that she's inherited. And in that moment, she realizes that she's on her own. And so we don't, like for us, it's not literal. The fairy tale shows it this way, that she's on her own. But she makes that choice in that moment from that place. And the one thing she does do is says that she surrenders her care to Providence. Surrender, something we've talked about many times. In this situation, this would be very challenging. When you have that belief, that conditioned belief that the world is an unfriendly place, and then you choose to surrender, that is like the biggest leap you could possibly make. But she has enough faith in something bigger than herself. We can call it whatever you want. You call it the universe, you can call it life, you can call it love. But she has this belief in something bigger than herself that has to supersede the experience that she's had in her home. So this is a really point, when people talk about the heroines as, victims just waiting to be saved. I mean, yeah, that takes a lot of courage to make that one step that she did make, to surrender to the Providence, because she realizes, I can't control this situation. There's nothing I can do. This situation is something she's not familiar with. And so she knows that she has to surrender because she has no answer. She doesn't know what's coming. She has no experience, no history of having this moment occur before. So now she has to let go of control because she doesn't know what's coming. So when she leaves home, she ends up meeting the king, and they get married. And soon after they get married, he goes off to war. So again, this is like in a fairy tale, they're looking for ways to depict these situations. They're looking for ways to say, this is what's going on here. And how can I show the internal situation externally? So the way that we see that situation here is through war. So what happens? So you meet somebody, and it's all rainbows and unicorns, and you think, okay, this is like the ideal situation. And then after you get married, then shortly, once the honeymoon period's over, the proverbial stuff can hit the fan, right? It all falls apart. But what we're not taught is that that's the way it's supposed to happen. Because what happens initially is you're lulled into this sense. You're kind of drawn into this relationship. Oh, this is great. This is perfect. This is ideal. But then what happens is that's like the vision of what's possible. And then you have to go through the muck, like the parts of you that don't believe in that may for a moment have believed in it, but in the unconscious actually don't. So what happens when the handless maiden marries the king is that he immediately goes off to war. So that conflict is instilled in the relationship. I don't know that instill is the right word, but is experienced, let's say. So he doesn't feel safe. She doesn't feel safe, right? Why would she? Because that's what she came from. The world is unfriendly. It is not safe. And so here she's experiencing it then, and he's experiencing it in their marriage. So from the beginning, from the opening scenes, what's going to be healed in this story? what's going to be resolved in this story. This is the issue that's going to be resolved in this story. So he goes off to war. Neither one of them feels safe. They feel vulnerable, and there's conflict, right? Because when you feel vulnerable, what do you want to do? Protect and defend. So there we go. There's the conflict and the war. So while he's away at war, she gives birth to a baby boy. So the king had left his mother there to watch over his wife and take care of her and help her. And so the king's mother sends a messenger with a note to the king to let him know that his wife and he has a healthy baby boy, and she gave birth. And so on the way to the king, the messenger comes to a river and he falls asleep. This is, as water is can represent emotion. And so in this place, falling asleep means going unconscious. So in this moment of a message going from one to the other, it's getting hijacked by the conditioning, by a pattern, by a trigger. The emotion gets constellated by the trigger, the situation, and then in that moment the devil shows up while the messenger's asleep, unconscious, and takes that message and replaces it with one that says she's given birth to an abomination. So when the king gets the message that she's given birth to an abomination, he feels terrible about it. He writes a message and says to his mother, take care of the queen and the baby. And so that the messenger begins its journey back to the king's mother and the queen, and again falls asleep at the river. Again, the devil changes the note and says to kill the mother and child. So when the king's mother gets the message, she can't do it. So firstly, let's look at the messages getting hijacked along the way. Most likely you've had this experience where someone says something, you get triggered by it, you go back later and you sit down with it and you think, what was their intention? What was it that they were saying? It is possible that they didn't mean this the way that I'm taking this. So if you take a moment to reflect, sometimes you can see that, or I don't really know what was behind that. What was their intention? What was going on to make them say what they said? So all these nuances about a comment, but if we're triggered, we often bypass all of that and just go immediately for the expectation. The expectation because of the history, because of the conditioning of what that comment may have meant in the past, may have suggested in the past, was what you just automatically assume it means. So this is what I believe that this changing of the messages means as you encounter the emotion. So if we can stop, somebody says something, we get triggered. If we can stop ourselves in that moment and keep ourselves from changing that message to what fits with our expectation, then we have an opportunity to change that, to bypass it, to see, okay, what is this showing me? What do I believe? What am I thinking? What do I see? What do I feel? What's being triggered? Why is it being triggered? Really allowing that moment to be a moment of pause instead of just continuing on with a belief in ultimately, right, the world is unfriendly, that this was their intention was not good, was not friendly, their intention was unfriendly. So the king's mother gets the note, says, I can't do this, which she really represents a moment of kind of realization, a moment of awareness, right? So the feminine, like I said, that pause, if I could take that moment to pause and say, what is this message? Is this message something that I should follow or not follow? So she kind of, which is really, I really love this about this story, is that she represents this kind of disruption this disruption in just going along with what's getting passed back and forth. She's kind of the first time we see some kind of wisdom come into the story in contradiction to the ego or the devil, right? She's the kind of this moment of like, okay, I'm not going to follow this. This doesn't feel right, and I'm going to find a way around it. So what she does is she tells the huntsman to go kill a deer and get its tongue, and then she would present that to the king, thinking she would present that to the king if she needed evidence that she had done this. So this is what happens, but she takes the maiden and she takes the baby and she ties the baby to the maiden's back, and she says, you know, you have to go away and never come back again. So once again, the maiden is on her way alone in the world, right? What's going to happen now? How's she going to survive? She doesn't know, but she goes and she wanders until she comes to a forest. And in this forest, she sees a little cabin. She knocks on the door, and the door is opened by an angel. The angel welcomes her in and basically tends to her and her baby. So what does the angel represent? And the angel represents the spiritual part of our consciousness. What's inside that actually transcends this situation. This kind of, when she's surrendering, what is she surrendering to? You could say God, or you could say actually this angel. This isn't the first time the angel has helped her in the story. It's the second time, actually. So the angel, they even say in the story, is the one who nurses the baby. So isn't that interesting? And the baby is a boy. So we have this new masculine, and the angel, the spiritual aspect of the feminine, of the heroine here, is infusing the masculine with this new energy of the spirituality and the spiritual connection. So when the king returns from the war, he says, well, where's my wife and child? And she said, you know, well, I did what you told me to do. And he's confused, right? Because remember, he sent the note that said, take care of them. And so he's confused about this. Like, well, what do you mean? She said, well, I got your note, and this is what your note said, so I did what you said. And he's horrified. And he's like, oh my God. And he just like completely breaks down. And she realizes again, she's like this wisdom in the story. She realizes this is genuine. He really didn't, this is something happened here that he did not intend for that to happen. And she said, okay, well, what really happened was this. And I sent her off and told her never to come back with the baby. So the king says, I will eat nothing and drink nothing until I find them. So he wanders for 7 years. For 7 years, he goes unnourished. And we've seen this in other fairy tales because the nourishment comes from the feminine. So when there's no connection to that, that's why people talk about like this conditioning to, you know, achieve something, get the college degree, get the family, get the house, get the job, get the everything. And they get all that. And then they're like, wait a minute, like, is this all there is? That's what this moment is. It's like what's missing. Like, how come I was told that this would bring fulfillment, but it didn't? Because again, there's that impulse that I had and that I was talking about earlier that was like something is off. And that's that moment when there's like this kind of pursuit, and then there's a pause and a reflection. And in that moment of reflection, it's a realization that, yeah, this isn't it. Even though I was told this was it, this isn't it. So that's why there's this emptiness in that moment, this midlife crisis, which is where it often happens, is right there, is because the realization dawns that this isn't the fulfillment that I thought it was going to be. And that's what the king is actually experiencing for those 7 years. And 7, of course, is a number of transformation, a number associated right with days of the week. So there's that kind of a completion that happens within 7 years. They talk about that being important. The cycles in life can happen in 7 years. So the king goes for 7 years, and then at the end of 7 years, he comes to a cabin in the woods, And over the door of the cabin, it says, "All are welcome here." So what you know by that sign over the door is that this change, represents a change in consciousness, because, right, the world was unfriendly, and now if you're welcoming everyone in, if all are welcome here, there's no judgment, there's no expectation of harm, there's none of things. And if you look at what's happening in the culture now, you can see how important this consciousness is, how important it is that we get to this place where we begin to step out of duality. And as I've said before, that's what dreams do. They're taking us out of duality and putting us into a unitary consciousness where we stop perceiving things as black and white. I also mentioned this, if you haven't seen it yet, with the movie Arrival, which really speaks beautifully to this idea of how language shapes our perception of our environment, and then that in turn shapes our experience. So if you have a language, which English is, which is rooted in duality, good and evil, light and dark, good and bad, if you have a language that's rooted in that, then you perceive through that lens. The dreams are out of the dualistic language. They're not speaking in English. They're not speaking in French. They're speaking in symbol. Symbol is universal because everybody's dreams are symbolic. Everybody's dreams are speaking in that language. It's a universal language. And in that language, it's unitary. It's not like if somebody would say, okay, it can't be unitary because if you have a dream, a nightmare, that's bad. And so when you look at it through the language, the English language, and you look at it literally, logically, and through that dualistic lens, then there's good and bad. But if you abstract it and look through the lens of symbolism, which is out of duality, then you can get the message in it. And yeah, I've yet to find a nightmare that was not perceived, that was perceived as negative, that in turn, once looked at symbolically, wasn't understood to be of benefit to the dreamer. So when the king sees them, the boy has now grown up. He's 7 years old, and the handless maiden says, "This is your father," and he says, "You told me my father was in heaven." And so this moment of understanding comes that, and I've had dreams about this, which I've also mentioned before, that our parents are not the parents that we have in this world. Our parents are, because we're the soul, and the soul exists before we come here, and the soul exists after we come here. So in reality, the parents are really just a vehicle through which the soul passes in order to take on a physical form. But the parents are not of this world. Our parents are, and I don't understand this completely, but somehow there's some unity, some unification in the other world that happens in order for us to incarnate. And so, yeah, it was a symbol in my dream because it's symbolic, and it was the solar eclipse. So typically the solar eclipse represents spirit and soul. So somehow the unity of spirit and soul is what happens before, suppose the creation of the soul, and then the soul incarnates and reincarnates that same soul. So yeah. So anyway, so the boy understands, like, that the consciousness has changed. It's not of this world. And so having a otherworldly father means that the ideas of this world and the duality and the light and dark and all that is basically has been transcended. And so that's not a rejection of the world, because it just means that you're perceiving through a different lens, and you're in the world. And at this point, quite honestly, you're very important to the world, because the ability to transcend that duality and then operate in the world through that consciousness can have a profound effect on others. So at this point, neither of them, the handless maiden and the king's consciousness, have both been transformed. Those 7 years he had of looking for her basically transformed his consciousness out of the warrior, and hers did, along with the son. So here we have also the Trinity, right? And so that also represents a transformation of consciousness and essentially a wholeness. So what's interesting too about this in terms of expectation and defend and protect mode is look at how many issues there are in the culture with the immune system. So I believe this directly is a correlation, and the more that we're able to resolve this sense of unsafe, the more I think that it's possible that this could reduce the amount of immune problems that we have in the culture. And I believe that there's more women that have this than men. So that also makes really a lot of sense in terms of our conditioning for the world. So it would change the worldview and our experience of the world. So thank you for joining me. This is, I thought this was really interesting to see how that defense and protection and our expectation of that really can influence our experience of the world. So I am very close to finishing my free mini course that I've mentioned before, that's going to introduce the Beauty and the Beast fairy tale and talk about really, it's going to be diving into more of how it's relevant for you. So if you're interested, you can DM me, or you can just drop a little note underneath this video and let me know if you would like more information as soon as I get it completed. I'm hoping with this week at the latest next week. So thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day and weekend, and take care.